What about the men's? Why feminism is relevant for men and why MRAs are wrong. I fully expect I will be getting some threats tomorrow on my Twitter. Okay, so you've probably noticed in the last couple of months, maybe even years, that there's been quite a bit of rise in anti-feminist sentiment, and specifically anti-women sentiments as well. And we see this in the election that just passed by, where we had the war on women in the US. It was a particularly bad election in this regard, where when somebody said, oh, hey, the rape guy lost, people needed to ask which one. That's a little scary. And things have been happening here in Canada too. I mean, we like to pass ourselves as this, social utopia, and we're not there. The Conservatives had attempted to reopen the abortion debate, something that not a lot of people know, but before he even had a majority government, Harper managed to codify to some extent the ability to discriminate against women in pay in his budget. So it is now somewhat more legal for companies to not pay women the same as men, and that's messed up. And we're seeing on the internet very much a rise in MRA movements. For those who aren't familiar with that, MRA refers to men's rights activists who basically say that feminists are out to get men and that they're creating this society where men can't be men and where we completely ignore men's issues. They use terms like feminazi, especially Rush Limbaugh likes to popularize this term as well, to create this idea that feminists and women who are outspoken about gender issues are trying to replace a patriarchy with a matriarchy. And they try to highlight these injustices against men as proof of the ideas. And the most popular ones, or the ones that can at least be taken even slightly seriously, are the ones, the difficulties faced by single fathers. It is true, actually, that single fathers have a very hard time because a lot of even just the social structures like healthcare, like playgrounds even, are geared more towards women. We have a situation where, somebody who looks male is on a playground and they get a lot more questions about why they're on the playground. Like, do you have a child here? And it's this sort of assumption that it's not natural for a man to be on the playground or somebody who looks like they might be male or presenting as male. There is, and this is something that's trying to be changed. I worked in family law, so I can actually say this. The laws are trying to change with this regard. But men are less likely to get custody than women. And another area of this is the lack of support for male victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And again, this is something I've actually seen firsthand, having worked for law firms and criminal law firms, where there are men who are actually victims of domestic assault, and they try to go to police or they try to go shelters, and there's no shelters for men for these issues. There's not a lot of rape crisis centers that cater to men. And in one particular situation, I knew a man who was being horribly abused by his wife, and in desperation finally called a women's shelter. And he told them, I know this is a women's shelter, I know you can't help me, but there's no men's shelter and I just don't know what to do anymore. And so they called the police, and the police came and they arrested him because they got a call from a women's shelter saying that there was a situation of domestic abuse. Luckily, we were able to help him. Luckily, I was involved in the case as a legal assistant, and I was able to help, and he didn't get convicted of domestic violence. Neither did his wife, though, and that's a problem. And yes, these are problems, and these are problems that exist. What's ignored by the people who call themselves men's rights activists is actually the underlying misogyny that is the root of these problems, and that's part of what I'm going to try to show in my presentation. And one of the first ways that this is starting, and something that actually ties in a little bit with Natalie's talk, is that the patriarchy, and I always hesitate to use that word because I always feel like the moment I use that word, people are just going to write me off and just not listen anymore because it's such a weighted word now. But the patriarchy, and it is the correct word to use in this situation, creates this false dichotomy based on gender. For the patriarchy to exist the way it does, we have to have this assumption that it's binary. That there are men and there are women, and there's no in-betweens, there's no correlation, they are different. They are practically different species as far as they're concerned. And there are specific characteristics and roles associated with each. But we start to see something really interesting when we start looking at the characteristics. So I'm going to play with their binary for a bit, and I'm going to say, on one side men, on one side women. Men are aggressive. We sometimes change this to men are assertive. That is the characteristic that we associate with men. And so by contrast, women are submissive. This is the sort of the idea that we have about gender roles. Men are sexual, men like sex. They go out and get laid. They constantly want sex. That's all they think about. And women are frigid. And when I say frigid, I don't mean that no woman anywhere wants sex. I mean that we have this social concept that women, if they can avoid sex, will do it. That we come up with excuses. Not tonight, honey, I have a headache. I've actually heard that more often from boyfriends than I've ever said it. But so when I say frigid, I'm not saying, just completely, oh, please don't look at my boyfriend. This isn't the one I meant. We have this concept of powerful. Men are powerful. The powerful businessmen in a suit, grr, we're all powerful men. And women are weak. Men are rational. We hear this a lot in atheist and skeptical organizations. We men, we are logical, we are rational. You women are too emotional. And I've actually had somebody who I consider a friend recently tell me of, I don't like arguing with you because you get too emotional, so I can't trust any of your reason. And I looked at him and I say, don't confuse passion for emotion, and if you do confuse that, I feel very sorry for you. But, there's not a problem with being emotional per se either. But we'll get to that later. Men are practical. Women are frivolous, If you think of somebody who goes on a shopping spree and spends way too much money, you're not usually thinking of a man. Men are ambitious and go-getters. Women are passive. We let things happen to us. Men are leaders, and women are followers. These are, in a very real sense, the dichotomies and the ideas of gender roles and gender expression, I should say, that very much still exist in our society. And then this translates to roles. Men are providers. Women are the nurturers. Men are hunters. Women are the gatherers. Men are protectors. Women are victims. And this is one that's going to come up a lot in my talk, because this last one is particularly important. And one thing that I think a lot of you will notice, less so in the roles, because the first two aren't necessarily bad things, but there's very much a skew towards the things that are considered feminine or associated with women as being very negative. They're not things we want to be. Nobody wants to say, I'm a passive follower. Well, who knows? Maybe there is somebody out there who wants to say that. And femininity and being female and anything associated with femaleness is considered degrading. And, we talk a lot about thought experiments this weekend, and I want to basically, I know I have them written up there, and I'm really sorry to anybody who's getting really upset with what's on that slide. But what are some of the worst things you can call a man? A pussy. Oh man, you're such a pussy. A sissy. A cunt. A bitch. Gay or fag. Twat. Douche. One thing that I'm hoping you notice is the worst things you can call a man is a woman, or in some way associated with women. Now, isn't that really interesting, that the worst thing you can call a man is a woman? The problem with femphobia, too, is that we're getting to the point where it impacts even how women act. There is now an increasing trend towards women not being allowed to be feminine either, and that being degrading. Oh, you like pink? What's wrong with you? Oh, don't cry in public because then people will think you're emotional and they think they can't take you seriously. You want to be a stay-at-home mom? How anti-feminist are you? We have this concept that femininity is degrading regardless of what your gender or gender expression is, and this is a problem. This, a woman wearing a suit is okay. In fact, some people may even look at that and say, hey, that's sexy. But this is embarrassing. If a guy were to, or considered embarrassing, if a guy were to walk down the street wearing that dress, we're going to look at him and we're going to judge him, and we're not going to judge him positively. And this is a problem. So let's re-examine those injustices that MRIs like to talk about with regards to men. So we have single fathers and custody for men. Why don't men get custody? Men don't get custody because our society thinks that the role of nurturer, the role of, the stay-at-home parent is the feminine thing to do. So a man who wants custody, well, there must be something wrong with him, because there must be a reason why he's being so feminine, and that's degrading. So a guy staying at home and being a stay-at-home dad, that's degrading, because men are providers, women are nurturers. And we see this even more when it comes to victims of domestic abuse and sexual assault, because the idea of women as victim is so ingrained in our society that when a man has to deal with sexual assault or domestic abuse, he's not just fighting to deal with this horrendous thing that has happened to him. He has to deal with actually starting to question his gender and gender identity, because his status as man is challenged. You can't have been raped because men are sexual and, women are passive, and so you must have wanted it deep down. You can't rape a man because guys want it all the time from anyone regardless of anything. No. But that's what we have. Men are protectors, women are victims. So if you're a man and you're a victim, you must really be a woman. The other impacts that we have of femphobia also translates to a lot of other issues where we have phobias. Anyone who doesn't fit into the binary concept of gender or acceptable gender behavior. So, people who don't fit into acceptable gender behavior. Men who want to be teachers or nurses or other professions that we consider as being feminine. They get a lot more problems. Interestingly enough, actually, they tend to succeed really well at those professions, but socially, they face a lot of judgment for it. Or what about people who don't fit into the binary as man must be, has a penis, acts like this, all these things. We just heard a talk from somebody who talked about these issues as well. And a lot of what she was saying, I think, resounds really strongly with this. What about people who don't identify as belonging to any gender? What about people who call themselves gender neutral? What about people who quantify themselves as being both genders? Why do they face so much oppression? Well, because we don't know how to treat them, because we treat men like this and we treat women like this. So if they don't fit into that, well, then how do we treat them? And then on a really fucked up other side of this is, I'm not going to say by any stretch of the imagination that trans men or lesbians don't face oppression, because they do, and I'm going to talk about that later. But more media attention is, or at least more of our attention ends up getting focused on gay men and trans women. And part of the reason for this is because society still sees it as men degrading themselves by becoming feminine. We see this as, oh God, how would a man ever choose to be feminine? Because that's just ew. And so we get this belief that gay men aren't real men, but they still look like men, so they could potentially pass, and oh no, that's scary. And one of the concepts actually that we have with that homophobes say, they'll say things along the lines of, gay men, if we allow them to marry, they're going to completely destroy society. And one of the times when I keep questioning them, ultimately what ends up becoming the answer, and we actually saw this in the Ontario election before too. Sorry. Violence. Well, yes, I'm going to get to that actually, because that is going to be later on in my talk. Thank you. And one of the things that we say is, how are they going to destroy society? Well, if we let gay men get rights, then we start treating them as okay, and that might tell little Timmy that it's okay to be Sally. We saw this at the Ontario election when they had those incredibly homophobic, incredibly femphobic, incredibly transphobic ads where they were saying, they had this cute little cis white girl with big eyes and blonde, and thank you for, I didn't remember what she looked like, so thank you for reminding me, saying, don't confuse me by, telling me it's okay for me to be a boy or that I can be a boy. And it's this huge fear that we have, that if we let people who don't fit into our binary concepts of gender, be accepted and be okay, then we're going to tell people, we're going to tell the normies that it's okay not to be normal, or that is what's supposed to be normal. And, so gay men aren't considered real men. And lesbian women are not considered real women, and this is a problem. Enter the rape threats, and enter the violence. One thing that we see a lot, and if you're a feminist activist online, you've probably seen this, is that women's worth is often dictated by her attractiveness and her sexuality. The cult of the virgin. When it comes to sexuality, women are supposed to be incredibly sexy, but somehow pure. You're supposed to be, the tigress in bed, but somehow not be a slut. And your attractiveness is important too, because your entire worth is dictated by how attractive you are. But what's really messed up is that even if you're attractive, you still don't get away with stuff. So, for example, if you're a fat or an ugly woman, or what society considers fat or ugly, you're not worth listening to because you're worthless as a woman. You clearly don't care about yourself as a person, because how dare you be ugly and fat, because that just makes you worthless. And then beautiful women are not worth listening to because they have to be stupid if they're beautiful, right? Or they probably just slept their way to the top. And we get this a lot. A lot of women end up dealing with this issue. There's probably people in this room right now who think they don't have to listen, or have unconsciously decided that they're not going to listen to what I'm saying because I'm what's considered overweight in this society, because I'm not conventionally pretty. So there's people here right now who think I have nothing of worth to say for that reason. So then when we get women who are aggressive, when we get women who get too uppity and infringe on men's scope of gender role, like, for example, women who point out and aren't afraid to not be passive and say, no, this is a bad situation. They need to be put in their place. And you see that on a lot of comments. You look at some of Jen McWright's comment threads. You look at even just some of Natalie Reid's comment threads. You look at a lot of strong women's comment threads, and the one thing that seems to crop up is this idea of women need to be put back in their place at the bottom. And one of the ways that they start doing that is by impacting the two areas in which people think that people think matter when it comes to women. So they start off by calling them ugly. Oh, you ugly fat bitch, you have nothing worth saying, so I'm not going to listen to you. Why is that always the first comment that appears? Why is that always the first plan of attack against women? Is I'm going to call her ugly, and I'm going to show her that she's worthless, because women's attractiveness is all that matters. And then, when that doesn't work, that's when the rape threats come in. Because let's not forget, men are protectors, women are victims. If you get too uppity as a woman, I'm going to threaten you with rape to show you how vulnerable you are, and just prove to you that you're a woman, by forcing on you something you don't want to happen, and by just showing you how I'm dominant man and you're weak woman, and showing you how I'm man and you're victim woman. And we see this as well in gay bashing and in trans bashing. We see this in the violence perpetuated against trans women. Oh, fine. You want to be a woman? I'm going to show you how much of a woman you are. I'm going to make you my victim. And that'll make you a woman. In some cultures, usually the one that's identified is the very machismo culture in Latino cultures, but this happens in other cultures as well. Men are encouraged to rape lesbians because that'll turn them back into real women. And if she just has a dick inside her, that'll make her go back on the right path of liking men. You get situations where fathers and brothers will rape their daughters and their sisters, not out of any sense of attractiveness, but because they think if they sleep with them, they'll turn them straight. Why? Well, because you'll remind them of a woman. How? Well, because women are victims. I don't want to oversimplify this. There are, of course, other issues that play into transphobia, homophobia, and all of this. But the femphobia, the fear of the feminine that we have in our culture, plays a big role in it. When you read trans blogs and you read some of the commentaries, one of the things that you see is sort of this idea of femphobia from both aspects. When you have, I believe you call them TERFs, right? That's how it is? TERF. They have this idea that, you're the patriarchy's handmaidens. Well, why? Because you're enforcing the stereotype that females have to, be feminine. Well, no, maybe you just want to be feminine. And what's wrong with being feminine? Why is being feminine a problem? Or you get the other side of it, where you get certain trans activists who say, if you're trans, you have to pass. You have to make sure that you look absolutely feminine, and you do this doing this, 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 and this. Well, why? Well, because if you're a woman, your worth is dictated by your attractiveness. What? We as skeptics, we as rational people, we have a responsibility to question the ideas that actually make this okay. We have a responsibility to look at what we're facing in our society and see just how fucked up it really is. And I'm sorry if you're insulted by my language, but no, that is the right description for this. It is fucked up. It's a problem that we live in a society where it's not okay for a man who wants to wear a skirt to not be able to wear a skirt. Where anyone has to question their gender because they've gone through something as horrible as sexual assault or rape. It shouldn't be about, what is wrong with you? You weird man being raped. How dare you do that, because that's just not right for men. No, we should be looking at this and saying, oh my God, what can I do to help? And we see this even in rape culture. The reason women are responsible for not being raped is because, we're victims. We're all automatically victims. So if you want to not be a victim, it's up to you to change that. No. It's up to society to change the opinion of what happens in this situation. We need a change of attitude. We need to stop making femininity be something that's considered degrading. I'm sorry that I'm at the point of near tears, but I see this happen a lot, and a lot of people keep talking about this. But we need a change of attitude. We need to stop creating this culture that is creating a society in which men can't express any aspects of femininity, but women can't either. Where the ultimate expression of degradation is femininity. Where people don't take someone seriously because they're wearing a skirt. Or where people think that it's okay not to take someone seriously because they don't fit what our culture deems as being attractive. And what's even more interesting about the fact is that what's deemed attractive isn't even changes from culture to culture. It changes from person to person. Actions and roles are not feminine or masculine. They're just actions and roles. And it doesn't matter who does them as long as they get done. With the possible exception of a victim. That is a role that nobody should have to play. And we all have a responsibility to be everyone's protectors. Gender is not a binary. Just like actions and roles and behaviors are not binary. You can be assigned female with a female expression and still do things that are classically associated as being masculine behavior, and there's nothing wrong with you. And you can be a man who's assigned male and presents as male and do stuff that's considered feminine without that having to affect how people treat you. You shouldn't be forced to question your gender just because people think what you're doing doesn't fit that. And if you're assigned a sex that doesn't match what your expression is, you shouldn't have to feel that by doing that expression and by identifying as the gender that you are or that you feel or sorry, I just want to make sure I say this right. But you shouldn't have to deal with this fear that society is going to turn it around on you and either make sure you feel female by being a victim, or be forced to feel bad because you're not female enough. I'm not looking for a genderless society. I'm not. I agree with everything Natalie Reid said in her last presentation. But what I am looking for is for a society where we as people don't have to fear to be what we are and do what we want to do. And this is why feminism is still relevant. And this is why feminism helps men too. Because if what I consider, and yeah, I realize no true Scotsman argument and whatever, but what I consider a true feminist is someone who fights for this idea of equality, who fights for this idea of social acceptance of gender not being a binary and roles not being a binary and actions and behaviors just not being a binary, and being in that way not necessary, or at least actions and roles and behaviors, those should be genderless, in the sense that it doesn't matter what you present as or what people assign you as. You should still be able to do them. Men should be able to be stay-at-home fathers. Women should be able to be CEOs. And if FSM forbid you end up as a victim, you should be able to get the help that you need, regardless of what your gender is. And this is why when MRAs stand up and they say that women are trying to replace it with a matriarchy, they are just ultimately institutionalizing this thought even further. Because they're making it a war of the sexes, and it's not that. Because like with any war, when you create that kind of war, everybody loses. Thank you.